Shalom. If you have ever felt so overwhelmed by the sheer chaos of life that a perfectly rational, logical person, right, suddenly found yourself looking up your astrological birth chart at 2 in the morning, take a breath.
Yeah, so take a deep breath.
Because I want to speak directly to you today. You aren't crazy. And, you aren't a hypocrite. We live in a world that is spinning incredibly fast, and those late-night psychological shifts where you just desperately want a clear answer about your future.
That's so common.
It really is. That is completely natural. It is not something to be judged or blamed for. Today, we are going to explore a really fascinating stack of source material that looks at exactly how we navigate that uncertainty.
And we are going to, gently walk alongside you as we unpack it, because it is such a vital conversation for the times we live in.
Definitely.
When we look at how modern people handle stress, we start seeing these behavioral patterns that, on the very surface, seem completely contradictory, but they actually make perfect psychological sense when you look under the hood.
That is the central paradox of our deep dive today. We are looking at this growing cultural phenomenon of people who strongly identify as atheists, agnostics, or highly rational skeptics, but who, during times of major life transitions or breakups or career strife, suddenly turn to astrology or tarot cards or, fortune telling.
Right, which society is so quick to judge.
Exactly. Society often points a finger and labels this as hypocritical. But our mission today is to look at this through a much gentler lens. Our sources propose that this isn't a silly contradiction at all. It is a profound window into how our minds cope. Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, let's get into it.
What exactly is happening mechanically in our brains when our stated logical beliefs completely clash with our physical actions?
Well, to understand the mechanics of this, we really have to look at the internal architecture of the human mind, specifically through the lens of Leon Festinger's cognitive dissonance theory.
Oh, right, from the 1950s.
Exactly, from back in the 50s. Festinger discovered that humans have this fundamental, almost biological drive for psychological consistency.
Meaning our brains need our actions to line up with our identities.
Precisely. So imagine a strict skeptic, right? Someone who builds their entire identity on requiring empirical scientific proof for everything. When that person hands over their credit card to pay for a psychic reading or a tarot spread, it creates this massive internal friction.
Because their brain is essentially firing alarm bells going, wait, our actions are violating our core identity.
Right. And that friction, that's cognitive dissonance. It's an actual visceral discomfort.
And nobody likes sitting in discomfort, so the brain has to find a back door to relieve the pressure, right? Like it has to fix the glitch without forcing us to admit we might be acting irrationally.
Yes. And the brain is incredibly clever at relieving this pressure without dismantling the person's core worldview. It deploys these cognitive biases as a defense mechanism.
Like what?
Well, one of the primary strategies our sources highlight is the bias blind spot. This is a mechanism where the individual subconsciously convinces themselves that they are somehow, immune to the irrationality that plagues everyone else.
Oh, interesting. So they think they're the exception.
Exactly. So if a religious person prays for guidance, the skeptic views them as superstitious. But when the skeptic consults a tarot deck, their bias blind spot allows them to categorize their own action as, like, an objective exercise.
Oh, I see. So they use a completely different vocabulary to justify the exact same search for meaning.
Yeah, they use this powerful psychological tool called reframing. The skeptic will tell themselves, well, I'm not doing magic. I don't believe in mystical spirits guiding these cards. This is just statistical self-analysis.
Wow. By intellectualizing the behavior, they strip away the supernatural element.
Right, which makes the action feel safe and completely congruent with their secular identity.
So because our modern secular society has essentially desanctified these ancient mystical tools, it gives skeptics a permission slip to use them. Our sources call this cultural scaffolding, like they are engaging in belonging without believing.
That is the perfect term for it. Belonging without believing. They don't actually believe there are literal entities moving the cards, but they use the cards as a sort of psychological Rorschach test.
A Rorschach test, like the ink blots.
Exactly like the ink blots. When you pull a tarot card with a vivid archetypal image on it, like the Tower or the Fool, your brain immediately projects its current subconscious anxieties and hopes onto that image.
Right, the card just becomes a container for self-talk.
Exactly. It forces the brain to break out of its repetitive, anxious thought loops and look at a problem from a completely new, randomized angle.
And underneath all of this is something called illusory pattern perception, right? Our automatic, almost desperate drive to find order in chaos so our nervous systems can feel safe.
Yeah, it's just our biology trying to calm us down.
That is so deeply validating. I mean, we all just want to find a pattern that tells us we are going to be okay. It's almost like we are using these ancient mystical systems as a modern big data algorithm for our own subconscious.
That's a great way to put it.
We're just feeding emotional data points into a system to get a readable, actionable output. But that brings up a really important question for me.
Okay, what is it?
If the ultimate goal here is just psychological comfort, and we just want to break our anxious thought loops, why consult the stars? Why do we need the tarot deck at all? If we just want objective self-analysis, why not just go see a licensed therapist?
Well, that is the million-dollar question. And the answer our sources point to really has to do with safety.
Safety, like emotional safety.
Yeah, not physical safety, but emotional and existential safety. Engaging with a therapist, or more specifically, engaging with traditional religion or the concept of a personal God, feels deeply threatening to a mind that relies on skepticism.
Because it demands vulnerability.
Right. Engaging with the stars or the universe, on the other hand, is incredibly safe because the universe is impersonal. It doesn't judge you. It doesn't ask you to change your behavior. This brings us to a crucial concept in our material known as emotional skepticism.
Okay, let's dig into that. What exactly makes skepticism emotional rather than just, intellectual?
Well, in our modern intellectual culture, we are taught from a very young age to distrust our intense emotions. We are taught that feelings are fragile, highly subjective, and often misleading.
Which, to be fair, they can be.
Right. They absolutely can be. The human brain is highly complex, but it's also easily compromised by basic physiology. Our brains constantly confuse physical fatigue, a drop in blood sugar, or hormonal shifts with objective existential reality.
Oh, wow, yeah.
There's a brilliant quote from the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche that our sources use to capture this. He said, "When we are tired, we are attacked by ideas we conquered long ago."
Oh, I love that. That makes perfect sense. It's like a car's check engine light flashing on the dashboard, not because the engine is actually failing, but just because the sensor itself is dirty.
Yes, exactly.
The signal is real, but the interpretation is completely wrong. You're exhausted at 2 in the morning, your amygdala hijacks your prefrontal cortex, and suddenly every existential fear you thought you had resolved is sitting right there on the edge of your bed.
That is a phenomenal analogy. The dirty sensor perfectly explains why we can't always trust the immediate alarm bells our brains ring. And because of that vulnerability, skepticism acts as an emotional shield.
So it's protecting us.
Right. It creates what psychologists call a demilitarized zone in the mind. The skeptic learns to suspend judgment entirely, a state known in classical philosophy as epic.
Epic, like holding things back.
Yeah, holding everything, especially big existential claims, at arm's length. This isn't just about rigorously demanding scientific proof. It is a profound emotional defense mechanism. It prevents them from being hurt, being fooled, or most importantly, losing control.
And when we talk about losing control, the sources highlight how this directly connects to a very specific philosophical concept called moral responsibility skepticism.
Yeah, this is a heavy one.
It is. By completely rejecting the idea of a personal sovereign God, the skeptic successfully avoids a terrifying philosophical idea called basic desert. And I want to make sure we explain this clearly because it's intense.
It is.
Basic desert isn't about getting a parking ticket. It's the philosophical idea that someone truly fundamentally deserves blame or praise for their actions in an absolute sense.
Exactly. It is the concept of ultimate objective accountability. If there is a creator, a sovereign God who made everything with intention, then there is a moral standard that exists outside of human opinion.
Which means we are absolutely accountable to that standard.
Right. And for someone who relies on skepticism to maintain a feeling of safety and autonomy, the idea of being completely exposed and morally accountable to an all-knowing creator is terrifying. It just strips away all their armor.
So to protect themselves from that terror, they use a psychological tactic called topic inhibition.
Yes.
They actively filter out the concept of a personal God from their worldview entirely. They adopt the persona of the detached, rational observer. Because if you are just a rational observer studying a random universe, you don't have to feel like a weak, dependent creature. You get to stay in the driver's seat of your own life.
What's fascinating here is that maintaining that illusion of control is paramount to the skeptic's peace of mind. Think about it. If I am reading a tarot spread, I am the one interpreting the cards.
You're calling the shots.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The cards aren't speaking to me. I am assigning meaning to them. I am in control of the narrative. I'm not submitting to a higher authority. I am simply utilizing a tool to understand myself better.
Yeah.
But this defensive posture, this massive fortress of skepticism they've built it, creates a very specific barrier when it comes to the Christian concept of God.
Right, which leads to a really interesting transition in our sources. We've established that skepticism protects us from feeling out of control, but the sources specifically contrast impersonal systems like tarot with personal religions like Christianity.
Yeah, there's a huge difference there.
Why is the Christian God uniquely triggering to the modern secular mind? Because, I mean, we don't see the same level of visceral cultural pushback against generic spirituality or someone talking about, cosmic energy.
Well, it comes down to the nature of truth claims. In our postmodern world, any claim to absolute exclusive truth is immediately viewed with immense suspicion. It is culturally coded as intolerant, arrogant, and even dangerous.
Because the prevailing cultural sentiment today is pluralism.
Right. Pluralism is the idea that all belief systems, all religions, and all philosophies only possess a small, fragmented piece of the truth, and absolutely no one has the whole picture.
But wait, let me play devil's advocate here for a second.
Sure.
Isn't pluralism just a practical way to keep the peace? In a globalized world with thousands of different cultures saying everyone has a piece of the truth, seems like a very polite, humble way to ensure we all get along. Why do our sources, and specifically the philosopher and theologian Tim Keller, view this as arrogant?
It's a great question because pluralism does sound incredibly humble on the surface, but Keller addresses this by looking at the logical structure of the claim, using that famous old parable of the blind man and the elephant.
Oh yeah, you know the story. One blind man feels the trunk and says, an elephant is like a snake.
Right. Another feels the leg and says, no, it's like a tree trunk. Another feels the side and says, it's like a wall. And the modern pluralist uses this story to say, see, every religion is just a blind man grasping a small part of the divine reality. No one has the whole truth.
Right, I've heard that a million times. It seems to make perfect sense.
But Keller points out the massive hidden logical flaw in how that story is used.
Which is?
To know that the blind men only hold a fragmented piece of the truth. You, the storyteller, have to be standing back with perfect, unclouded vision, seeing the entire elephant.
Oh, right.
Keller argues that pluralism is itself an incredibly exclusive claim. By claiming that all religions only see a part of the truth, the skeptic is implicitly claiming to have the supreme, exclusive vantage point of the whole reality.
Wow, they are claiming to be the only one who isn't blind.
Oh, wow. That completely turns the accusation of arrogance on its head. The person claiming everyone else is blind is actually making the boldest claim of all.
Exactly.
And the sources show how Keller also applies this exact same logic to the cultural conditioning argument, right? You constantly hear skeptics say, all beliefs are just products of their specific historical and cultural environments. Therefore, none of them can be objectively true.
Yes, and Keller points out the fatal flaw there too. If all beliefs are merely products of culture and therefore not objectively true, then the belief that all beliefs are cultural is also just a cultural product of modern Western secularism.
It mathematically cancels itself out.
It does. It is a self-defeating statement.
It is a philosophical snake eating its own tail. And this reveals something really profound that the authors of our sources point out. The skeptic actually has what they call a hidden faith.
Yes. We tend to think of strict skepticism as the total absence of faith. But believing that the entire universe, with all its mind-boggling complexity, is entirely random and meaningless actually takes an immense amount of faith. It cannot be scientifically proven that the universe has no meaning.
Precisely. And similarly, when a skeptic relies on astrology or tarot during a crisis, it demands faith in a pattern. They might try to intellectually reframe it, but they are fundamentally placing their trust in a hidden architecture of the universe.
But again, it's an impersonal architecture.
Exactly. The difference is that astrology is an impersonal architecture. It doesn't make any moral demands on your sex life, your finances, or your ego.
It just tells you what might happen.
Right. The theology of the Christian God, however, describes a deeply personal being. According to the sources, this God possesses agency, he speaks, and he gives moral commands. To a mind that has built a fortress of skepticism specifically to stay safe and in control, a personal God feels like an unpredictable invasion. You cannot control a personal God.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. If a skeptic is trusting the precise astrological alignments of the universe, this ancient idea of as above, so below, that the macrocosm of the stars directly reflects the microcosm of our daily lives. Aren't they implicitly agreeing that the universe has an intentional design?
Yeah, they are.
If you believe the alignment of planets at your birth dictates your personality, you are basically saying the universe operates like a highly complex computer code. And code doesn't just write itself out of nowhere.
That is the exact logical bridge the sources want us to cross. Because when we move from the micro patterns of fortune-telling to the macro patterns of astrophysics and cosmology, the evidence for intentional design becomes absolutely staggering.
Well, this is the fine-tuning argument, right?
Yes, the fine-tuning argument. When we study the physical universe, we find that the foundational parameters and constants that govern reality are unimaginably precise.
How precise are we actually talking? Let's ground this so we can understand the scale of what scientists are looking at.
The numbers are almost impossible for the human brain to comprehend. Let's just take the force of gravity. Physicists have calculated that if the strength of gravity varied by just 1 part in 10 to the 60th power, that is a 1 followed by 60 zeros, life could not exist.
Wait, explain why. What physically happens if it's off to that microscopic fraction?
If gravity were just slightly stronger by that fraction, the universe would have collapsed back in on itself into a black hole immediately after the Big Bang.
Oh, wow.
And if it were slightly weaker, matter would have expanded so rapidly that atomic cohesion wouldn't occur, dust would never gather to form stars, planets would never form, and we would just have a cold, dark void of dispersed hydrogen gas floating forever.
1 in 10 to the 60th power. That's not just a lucky coincidence. That is mathematically absurd. That is like trying to hit a target the size of a single coin from the other side of the observable universe while blindfolded.
Exactly. And gravity is just one dial. The cosmological constant, which is the energy density of space that drives the expansion of the universe, is fine-tuned to 1 part in 10 to the 53rd power.
So another impossibly huge number.
Right. If it were slightly different, again, no life. Now, the strict materialist worldview has to attribute this to near impossible blind chance. Or they have to hypothesize an infinite number of unobservable universes, a multiverse, where we just happen to live in the one lucky universe that supports life.
But both of those secular explanations require a massive, unprovable leap of faith.
Exactly. But the theological worldview presented in our sources looks at that incomprehensible mathematical precision and points to a rational mind. It points to a designer.
Because, going back to our analogy, if there is a code, there is a coder.
Right.
If the universe has a pattern that allows us to miraculously exist, it implies intention. And this is where the conversation beautifully shifts from the cold physics of cosmology back to our very real personal anxieties.
It does beautifully.
Our sources draw a stark, fascinating contrast between two different ways of viewing this design: fate versus providence.
Yes. This is the crux of the emotional journey the authors lay out. Fortune-telling, astrology, and tarot all operate on the philosophical principle of fate. Fate is cold.
Just a blind algorithm.
Exactly, blind necessity. It is a rigid, impersonal algorithm. If your astrological chart is bad, or you pull a terrible combination of tarot cards, you are just out of luck. You just have to brace yourself and suffer through it.
It's all performance-based and fear-driven. You're just trying to hack the system to avoid disaster.
But providence, which the sources describe as the Christian understanding of God's governance over the world, operates on a completely different paradigm. It is fundamentally about grace.
Okay, unpack that. How is it about grace?
The theological argument here is that providence is the sovereign loving care of a personal creator. It is the belief that the exact same mind who fine-tuned the cosmological constant to 1 part in 10 to the 53rd power is the same mind who knows your name.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Who knows your deepest anxieties and is actively working all the chaotic events of your life together for your ultimate good.
Wow.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the authors suggest that acknowledging our human limitations and our total inability to control the future isn't a defeat. It is actually the beginning of real psychological freedom.
Because we don't have to carry the weight of the universe on our shoulders.
Exactly. The theology presented here uses 2 beautiful Latin terms to explain this. Prescientia, which means perfect foreknowledge, meaning God sees all of time at once.
Right.
And gubernatio, which means his active governing care, ensuring that history reaches a redemptive conclusion. The argument is that trusting an all-knowing, governing creator offers infinitely more psychological security than trying to nervously hack the universe's code with a deck of cards.
Because a deck of cards can't love you. The stars can't hold you when you are crying over a broken relationship. They are just beautiful, burning rocks suspended in a vacuum.
Yeah, they really are.
We reach for them because we are desperate for a pattern that makes us feel safe in a scary world.
And the authors emphasize that this desperation is not something to be mocked or looked down upon. It is a profound, valid spiritual hunger. The skeptic who reads tarot in the middle of the night is expressing a deeply human longing for meaning.
They are searching for a narrative that makes sense of their pain.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean? If we synthesize this entire journey we've been on today, for you, the truth seeker listening right now, engaging in astrology or looking for signs in the universe, isn't some absurd, hypocritical contradiction.
No, not at all.
It is a beautiful, vulnerable act. It is the act of a wanderer looking for the shadow of God in a universe that modern society told you was completely empty. You are out there digging wells in a dry land, hoping to find water.
That's a great way to look at it.
And your skepticism, that isn't a fatal flaw in your character. It is just a moat you built to protect your castle because you've been hurt or because you are terrified of being vulnerable and out of control.
And the most beautiful part of the perspective offered by these sources is that you don't need to forcefully dismantle your mode of skepticism.
You don't.
No, you don't have to suddenly abandon your rigorous critical thinking or your desire for evidence. Instead, the theological invitation here is to simply consider, what if there is already a king inside the castle?
Wow.
The authors propose a king who loves you, who intricately fine-tuned the cosmos just so you could exist, and who, according to the Christian narrative, actually gave his life on a cross to bridge the gap between human anxiety and divine peace.
That shifts everything.
It does. When we shift our desire, when we stop trying to control a blind, cold destiny and start leaning into trusting a loving Father, something miraculous happens to our psychology. Those heavy, defensive walls of skepticism can naturally turn into doors of humble, peaceful exploration.
I love that. Walls turning into doors.
But before we wrap up, I think this leaves us with a fascinating question for the future.
Oh, what's that?
Well, if our brains are biologically hardwired to look for an ultimate author, what does it mean for our secular society as artificial intelligence and predictive algorithms become the new, infallible stars we look to for life answers?
Oh, wow.
Are we just building a massive digital tarot deck? It's something profound to think about.
That is a brilliant question to end on. Walls turning into doors and the new digital stars we are building. If you are listening to this and you've been relying on the stars or the cards or just your own fierce skepticism to keep you safe from the chaos of life, we see you.
Yeah, we completely see you.
Your journey is valid, your questions are incredibly important, and your desire for peace is deeply understood. You don't have to have it all figured out today.
Just take it one step at a time.
Just know that there's a profound case for design and the possibility of a designer who loves you beyond measure. We are so honored to walk alongside you as you continue to explore these deep questions. May the Lord bless you.